Hi everyone, I'm Rita Omokha. I am the author of Resist: How a Century of Young Black Activists Shaped America. I'm also a freelance reporter focused on the vulnerable and race relations, and I'm a professor at Columbia. Welcome. Okay, so for today, I'd like to give an outline to let you know what to expect today. I'm going to just start by letting you all know why I became a writer. I did transition careers from being in marketing and sales, and I'll give you a bit into how that came to be and why I wanted to start writing as my form of resistance and to speak out. And then I'll go briefly into why I wrote my book, Resist, and how that came to be as well. And then we'll delve into what it means to use writing, to use the written word as a form of resistance, especially in the time that we're in right now. And then also go a little deeper to discuss what it means for writing to be a form of activism. And then we'll have the breakout sessions where you break out into different rooms, you have different prompts, and this gives you time to discuss what we discussed so far, but also give you time to share together, and then you all each have a different prompts to guide that conversation. In the end, we'll regroup and then we'll share what we each, discuss in our different rooms, and then have some key takeaways. And I have a little homework for you all, but it's really just some tools to help you integrate writing into your everyday life. Okay, why I write and why I became a writer. I think for me, storytelling has always been part of who I am. I came to this country when I was really young in the early 90s. And when I first came, it was really hard to assimilate to this country. There was a confluence of things going on. I grew up in a not so, safe environment in the South Bronx. And I say that only because that added to the assimilation woes. I also had a really bad stutter, and because of that, I was a bit more timid. I didn't talk a lot. So I was more observant, a bit more critical in how I saw things. And I think that began to help me just understand how to navigate this country that I was now thrust into. But it wasn't until I got to about fifth or sixth grade that I realized that just storytelling was part of me. In fifth or sixth grade, the very first book that I read that I felt, seen in was called Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston. And why that book really did it for me was because if you read it, part of how she does her dialogue in the book is she uses broken English. And for me, as a Nigerian at home, we spoke Pidgin English, which is our form of broken English. So for the first time, I finally saw myself in the written word, and it did something to me. I feel like you have a calling in your heart, but something sparks it. And for me, that was the first spark. It was also a time where I realized, oh wow, I can write like the way I want to. And so it helped me start to craft my identity in this country. And so I got into reading more books and understanding what it means to just use words to connect with myself. I began to journal some more and just started to understand the power of the written word, especially because it was hard for me to communicate with my mouth because of my stutter. And so that was the beginning stages for me. Fast forward, I finished college. I studied marketing and sales and in college, and I really didn't know how to make storytelling a career because I had never seen it firsthand. And also, I went to math and science high school, and I was really good with numbers, really good with the analytical. So business made sense for me. I was also in a business program in high school. So it just made sense that I would go into business. So I went to undergrad business school. Fast forward, got a job at CNN, NBC, Viacom, worked in sales and marketing at all those jobs. I loved it. I did really well at it, but it just wasn't my calling. I was making all this money and I was not fulfilled. I knew I wasn't working and walking in my purpose or in my calling. And so my last job was at Viacom, and I just had this realization, like, what am I doing? I know in my heart what I want to do. I know in my heart that writing is just part of me. I love it. Why am I wasting my time in a job that, yes, I love, I do well in, but it's really a waste of my time because I'm not fulfilling my purpose. And I realized, time is the only currency we really don't know how much we have left of. So why would I waste my time in a career that, yeah, sure, I'm doing well, I'm making money, but I'm not fulfilled. I'm not doing anything purposeful in accordance to what I know is my calling. All those years ago, after reading Their Eyes Were Watching God. So that realization led me to just, take the leap and bet on myself. I was going to be as risk tolerant as I possibly can to pursue what I know was my calling. And that's what I did. I applied to Columbia University for journalism and got my master's there. And that is really what cemented my career. And I became a freelance reporter. That was just in 2020. And I'll get more into that in the next slide when I talk about the book. But at Columbia, I realized firsthand this is home. Everything just felt so perfect. The other thing I knew I wanted to do was be a freelance reporter. And because of that, I knew I had to figure out a niche. Like, what do I want to report on? What is the thing that I'm really passionate about? And I knew it was going to be the vulnerable because I grew up on the margins. I grew up in not the greatest situation. I don't like the P word poverty, but we didn't have a lot growing up, basically. But we made do. We were happy kids. We made do. So I knew I wanted to craft a niche that focused on families like mine who often are unseen, are in the shadows, who are relegated to being saying like they don't have a voice. I wanted to be the amplifier of those voices on the margins because I was one of those people who lived on the margins. And so I crafted a niche to say, I'm going to always report on the vulnerable and race relations. And that's what led me to writing and why I began to write. What led me to write my book, Resist, goes back to Columbia. So I graduated on May 20th, 2020. And part of graduating, I got a lot of cash prizes because I graduated top of my class. But that's not why I'm telling you that part of the story. 5 days later, if you all remember, on May 25th, 2020, George Floyd was murdered. And I remember just watching how he was murdered. And we all know the story really well. If you don't, please look it up. And it was just so gruesome, so vicious that I felt like, okay, I just graduated with my journalism degree. I felt like I had this license to do something and I wanted to do something. But then I remembered I did have the resources, all the cash prizes that I got to actually do something. And what I really wanted to do was go across the country and just talk to people, everyday people, about how they were navigating that time that we were in. There was a compounded nature of things happening that year, if you recall. We had the deaths of Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery. We were in the middle of a pandemic that was taking hold of the world. There was just so much happening. And I wanted to understand how people were contending with that time. That was one layer of it. Another layer of it was race relations. I think George Floyd's death really put a laser focus on race relations, especially in this country. And going back to how I came to this country as a Nigerian immigrant, to be sincere, I sincerely never saw race. I never even had a conversation about it at home because once I got home, it was a Nigerian bubble. We didn't talk about race or racism or discrimination. We were just here, we were surviving and focused on our academic excellence. So there was that layer of trying to understand why is it that this man was so viciously treated and killed just because he was Black, right? It wasn't because of a counterfeit $20 bill. Let's get sincere with that. So I wanted to understand all of that. And so I went on a cross country trip in the end, I went to 30 states in 32 days. And one of the stops that I went to was in Portland, Oregon. And this was the stop that really cemented the idea for this book. I came across this downtown area where young people were gathering and protesting the times we were in, but they were also protesting in remembrance of another young Black man who had been killed at the hands of police. His name is Patrick Kimmons. And as I watched them, organize and galvanize this protest, and I followed them throughout the day from about 4 p.m. to 11 p.m., and I was just watching them, how they were just so audacious and how they carried out this protest, how they were so keenly aware of the plight before them. And I'm watching them thinking, when I was 13, 14, or 15, like I said, I didn't know anything about race or discrimination or even protesting. So I'm watching them, mesmerized by them, and I wanted to know, what is the framework for this, right? How do they know they can actually protest? What is the origin story of protesting? And that's what Resist does. Resist looks at 100 years of protesting by young people, young Black people, and their allies, and how they've been at the forefront of fortifying and safeguarding this democracy that we are all inheritors of if we live in this country. And in the end, my key takeaways are here. The first thing I realized was every single person I cover in the book, from Ella Baker, Barbara Johns, Charlie Cobb, to the Base 7, every single one of these young people and these young groups, they first understood that they had power in their voice, and that their voice was their greatest ally and ultimately their greatest weapon. Because all it took for any of them to do something was to say, we can do something. I don't want to get into the details of too many of the characters, but one character that does always stand out to me was Barbara Johns. Many of us know Linda Brown with the Brown versus Board of Education case, but many people don't know Barbara Johns. She was just as pivotal in that case. And all she did was she looked at her situation, a young Black girl in 1951 going to all Black, poorly served school, no resources. They were having classes in tar paper shacks that when it rained on them. When the school grew, instead of building a building for them, the school, all white school district, made them have classes in school buses. And so Barbara Johns looked around. Every day she's on the school bus, she'll pass the all white school, and she would see every few months a new garden, a new building, a new extension. And then she would get dropped off at her all Black school, and it was the same substandard conditions. And one day she told the students in her school, we have the power. Our parents have tried to do something. Our parents have tried to talk to the school district on our behalf, and yet nothing has been done. But we have the power. We are the people that have the power. And she convinced the entire student body to strike. And that is what led to them being part of the 5 consolidated cases in that Brown case. And of the 5 cases that went up to the Supreme Court in that Brown case, Prince Edward County, where Barbara Johns went to school, had the most student plaintiffs. 177 total plaintiffs, 117 came from that one action, because she realized there was power in her voice. She used her voice to convince more people, to get that collective buy-in, and then they had this monumental movement. So that was one of the greatest key takeaways for me, is just realizing that you first have to know that you have power in your voice. The other takeaway for me was understanding that this freedom that we all walk in this country, in America, it wasn't free. People had to die for it. People had to bleed for it and fight for it. So now that we are all inheritors of this freedom, we have to do something. And you have to realize that anyone, anywhere, you can be an activist. And we'll get more into that. And so that was my main key takeaway from writing Resist, and why I chose to do more workshops on writing as a form of resistance. Next, I'm going to talk about what it means to have writing as activism and resistance. First, we'll define what activism is in a very succinct way, and how we can use that as a tool for social and political change. Activism, I think people, when they hear the word activism, they're thinking about protesting, bullhorns, a lot of screaming, but it's not just that. The baseline and overarching definition of what activism is performing some action that can lead to, or does lead to, social or political change. So that could be a plethora of things. That can be you volunteering at a soup kitchen, ensuring that those who are facing hunger in your city, in your town, they don't go hungry. That is doing something toward that social change. Or it can be writing as a form of that activism. To use the written word as a form of activism, first, as I mentioned, you have to recognize that you do have the power, right? To recognize that, you have to get comfortable being uncomfortable. A lot of people don't realize that the first step in using either your actual, spoken voice or your written word is getting comfortable in those uncomfortable situations and getting actually comfortable with your voice, either the spoken voice or the written word. Once you're comfortable in knowing that you have the power, you have the authority within you to do something, then you have to act on it. Then you actually have to do something about it. I want to give us a formal definition of what it means to use writing as a form of resistance. I took a long time to try to figure out what is the most succinct way to define it if you want to write this down or take a screenshot. And I came up with this very short definition. I think it really gets to the heart of it, and I'll expand it once I read through it so we can kind of sit with it. Writing as a form of resistance means to use the written word to challenge, question, or oppose power structures, social norms, or oppressive systems. It's about giving voice to marginalized experiences, questioning dominant narratives, and advocating for change through the power of language. So then it turns writing into a tool for empowerment and activism. So in short, writing is powerful when you know how to use it, when you know its power, especially now. I'm now starting to, we're joining from many places across the world, but no matter where you're joining from, you have to first tap into your power. I think a lot of people never really do much or know how to tap into that because they're afraid. And what fear really is, it's a culmination of what ifs. Like, what if I fail? What if I do this and this happens? You have to move from that idea of the what if to even if, right? So even if I write this letter or I write this article and it does nothing, what happens? Am I still alive to try again? Yes. So I think the idea of tapping into your power, your voice, your written word is moving from the what if, from the fear to the even if, right? Even if it's more of a conviction of faith that I can do something, even if it's just localizing what I can do, even if it's just looking in my community and saying, I can do something, then do it. The worst that can happen is it goes into the void and nothing happens. But then what if you can empower that one student to do better? Maybe you're volunteering at an after school program and you just sit with one student who's having a hard time and you help them through something, right? You're doing something, but you first have to realize that you can. And to me, that really means moving from the what ifs to the even ifs and just try, especially now, especially in this country, in America. This is no time for any of us who know that writing is our form of resistance to just sit on the sidelines. I think this is the time for us to use our voice to be the loudest opposition and just do something. And you can start as small as possible. The question is now, how do I start? What do I do? Let's get into that. The first thing, there are 5 key takeaways I really want to empower all of you with if you're thinking about, okay, writing is my form of resistance. How do I start? The baseline here is like you have to localize it, right? You can't think of the macro issues right now. You want to start micro. So start with a passion. So as I mentioned earlier, for me, what I write about goes back to my upbringing. I grew up on the margins. I grew up in a very unsafe neighborhood where police violence ran rampant. So a lot of my writing has to do with race relations and the vulnerable, as I mentioned earlier. So to get started, the first thing I would recommend you do is to start with a passion. What is that thing that you're super passionate about? Is it police violence? Is it women's rights? Is it climate change? Is it hunger prevention? Is it children's education? Is it education? When you start with something that you deeply care about, like I mentioned with me personally, there's a purpose to it. There's a way you write about it that it becomes really authentic to you and you're eager to learn more. As a reporter, I always say I'm forever going to be a student because I'm always learning something. Even with police violence, there's so much to learn. There's so much to report on. There's so much to do. So the first step is to start with your passion. What do you really care about? Just think about it. Just sit with it. And then you can move from there. The next recommendation I have is to, like I mentioned earlier, you want to start small and set achievable goals. For those of us who know what SMART goals are, SMART, it's specific, it's measurable, it's achievable, it's relevant, and there's a time constraint to it. So you can start with anything. Like if it's in your neighborhood, you're trying to get that stop sign on that corner that's really busy, you can start there. You can write a letter to your local council member and say, hey, this thing has been going on. Start there. You can start with a blog post. You can start with a social media post. Just start and start getting comfortable vocalizing your opposition. I think that's the point here. You want to start small, and then from that, you kind of get bigger. Don't feel like you have to have your first thing that you write be in the New York Times or for it to go viral or whatever it is a gauge of what's successful in these days. You have to start where you are. And again, make sure it's almost personal, right? Because then you'll be authentic in it. You'll be more eager to research and write more about it. The third thing, which I mentioned earlier, but it's really, really important to writing and using your voice, is getting comfortable with your voice, right? Use your unique background, your unique lived experiences. Going back to my example, the reason why I was so eager to start writing is because I looked at my life. I looked at how I came to this country for so long. Immigrants, for example, are usually invisible. No one thinks about immigrants and our struggles in this country. So it was something that I knew I can do, but I first had to get comfortable writing about it, getting my name out there, and just being more intentional about it. So your voice can have impact, but first you have to know that you do have a voice, and then you get comfortable with it. The more you're writing, the more you're using. And again, start small. It could be a blog, so it could be social media, it can be writing a letter to your local statesman, right? So just again, getting in the habit of getting comfortable. The next one is really important, which is you have to find a way, and I'll give you for the homework, that's what I'm going to give you, finding a way to make writing a regular habit, right? A lot of us, we journal, but find a way to make that journal expand into more writing, right? So if it's doing a habit of every morning, every night, I'm going to journal for 5 minutes, or it could even be researching regularly so you can know what you can write about. A lot of times my research informs my writing. I'm always reading local news. I live in New York City, so it's like really saturated with the national news of the day. So I try to read local news so it informs how I write, right? It kind of gives me that momentum to keep researching and writing. And you can be anything. You can start with journaling or essays. If you like poetry, you can do that as well. But just find a way to integrate it into your schedule. The last one is you have to find a way to develop a community of people who are like-minded, right? So you can join your local writing workshop. There's so many online these days, and I can send you all some if you do want to do that. There's so many writers workshop that you can be part of in your local community as well. You can join a book club. Some book clubs do writing exercises. I know that for a fact. So just find a way to get plugged in, because when you surround yourself with people who are like-minded, you're more often than not to continue that writing and making it more regular. And again, I can send you all online workshops that you can join that is regular. They meet, I think, once a month, and that just kind of gets you in that habit and to see how best you can amplify your voice together, or just kind of keep you motivated as you're trying to figure out how to use writing as a form of resistance. With that said, we are good on time. Yes, perfect. With that said, we're going to go into our breakout rooms. In about 2 minutes, you'll be broken out into 4 rooms. And in each of your room, you have room 1, room 2, room 3, room 4. And in each room, you will have these prompts. But I want you all to sit with each of these prompts. The room 1, for example, discuss an issue that deserves more attention today. If you were to write about this issue, what form would your writing take? And what message would it convey? And so for each of these prompts, come up with 3 to 5 different ways or lessons or things that you can do for each of the prompts here. So I'm going to have Summer break you all out into rooms. I'm going to come into each room after about, 2 to 3 minutes. But while you're in your rooms, before we break out, you want to spend the first 5 minutes to discuss your topics that, again, the prompts will be in your room. And then the next 5 minutes, if we have time for each person to just quickly 30 seconds to individually write about 2 to 3 responses that they would have to that. So spend a total of 5 minutes on that. And then the next 5 minutes, each person, if possible, share one of your own response with the group. And then the last 5 minutes, agree on 2 to 3 responses that one person from each group will share with the larger group. I hope that's clear. If not, just let me know when I come into your room. Yeah, we would love to hear from every group. Again, we have about 9 minutes left. So about 1 minute to 2 minutes, just tell us the discussion and your, 2 to 3 takeaways. So let's start with room one. Who is volunteering to speak from that group?
Hi.
Hi.
Hi. We were talking about a few different issues that are facing everybody globally. We're all kind of going through crises right now. From Ireland to Canada, U.S. And so some of those issues were, most of them really centered around empowerment. What you were saying about recognizing the power in your own voice, self-advocacy, and creating a bridge for people and a space for people. And what we really kind of got into is connecting on an analog level outside of the digital realm, and kind of getting away from some of the anonymity and some of the space that that the virtual world kind of creates. That as artists, we've got different ways of communicating through different type of media, print media, verbally in groups, and just addressing lots of different issues, health crises, political crises, obviously, censorship, all those things that are going on right now. So, yeah.
And when you all discussed analog, was there any examples that you all came up with?
Yeah. Actually, we're talking about the printing press. I think it was Miss Leslie. She mentioned a gentleman that had a printing press in the back of a bicycle at a protest, and was riding around distributing, literature, just zines, creating zines and different type of written materials. But yeah.
That's amazing. And then what would if you all come up with any messaging, what would that convey? What would that messaging convey?
Didn't really specify one, but I think mostly um kind of echoing what you said about empowerment of self and recognizing the power of our own voice, because we were talking about how the apathy that most people feel when they sit on the sidelines is that not knowing what we have to contribute, well, not knowing what we have to offer, and then that kind of makes us stick our head in the sand.
Yeah, right, exactly. Well, that's great. That's great. Okay, moving on to room two. Who's the spokesperson from there?
Hi, Joy from Ireland.
Hi. Thanks for joining, Joy.
Thank you. So we started off about talking about how writing can transform the kind of negative emotions or whatever through what you're suffering now, and turn it into something positive. Sort of maybe soothe your soul. So to, and kind of go out with that message and join with that message with other people and stuff, rather than just suffering alone. Then there was another one. It allows us to clarify our thoughts. Like if you write something, you're really, you're only persuading yourself most of the time. And then once you've clarified your thoughts, you're then in a position to decide about your next steps and what action you can take and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And then it's a compulsion. You know what I mean? Like most social activism is, it's finally just enough. I can't sit idly by. And it's whether it's bravery as a kind of art form or whatever, but the writing is our instrument for a room full of writers. So that's what we're going to use, but we just can't put up with it anymore. We just, we're not waiting for somebody else.
Right. That's powerful. That's great. Perfect. Thank you so much. Room three. Who's the spokesperson from room three?
Hi, I'm the spokesperson from room three, Aisling. We talked about how writing can be, documenting for yourself your own story. It's almost like a political act, because you're claiming your own story if you document it yourself and write. You claim your own identity, and you in that way challenge stereotypes, because you're taking up your own space and you're writing your own story. And I suppose communities are made up of individual stories. And say, for example, one of our group described the protests in Kenya, of the Gen Z protests, and how they were all a group of individual stories that came together to, form a collective identity.
Yeah.
And then we talked about how, people can be afraid to tell their own story because they don't want to be kind of reinforcing stereotypes. But we kind of looked at that from the listening point of view. One of the ladies in our group was afraid that her story was just a typical kind of vanilla type story. And, it's about how that story is received. Are people actively listening to that story to judge or to comment or to respond, or are they listening to the story to understand? So that's a very important component in how how is the writing received, and how do people want to receive the writing? What's their reason for it? But yeah, we talked about how you can't tell somebody else's story. You can imagine what it's like for another person, but only the individual who's experienced it can really tell the story,
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that was the main points.
Okay. That's perfect. Thank you for sharing. Last room 4. I'm just looking at the time here. That's why I'm trying to speed through them. Room 4.
I'm gonna jump in from room 4. So there were a lot of great ideas in terms of making resistance writing amplified. My group mates Millie, she was talking about like book groups. Sky said that readers have to educate themselves on what they read. You
Right.
can't jump into a reading you don't know what it is that you're looking at. And also understanding like with book bans and stuff, like how complex these histories are. They need to be told. There was also Kim talking about using social media to amplify what readers have learned. And one thing that I injected into that is the economy of it all, right? A lot of times corporations especially are only able to answer to us when it affects their bottom line. And as readers, if we're able to buy books that are written by writers who are considered it's you don't want to read their stuff because it's fearsome, you don't want to read their stuff because it's divisive, all in quotations. But if the bottom line is showing that this is what people want to read, then that is a way of amplifying those writings as well. But I also really liked what the other group said too, like with building bridges and self-advocacy, pushing for analog because it connects people, and claiming the identity with how you read too. That's also like good steps for like readers to be to show resistance.
Yeah. No, these are all perfect. Thank you all so much for sharing. It seems like you all had great discussion points. Just to quickly do, again, thank you all so much for being so actively and participating in this. I really appreciate that. Just for the interest of time and to respect your time, I want to just kind of go through the next slide and give you your homework. It's really just to help all of us make writing, as I mentioned earlier, part of our day. I know people have started to see the word journaling as trite or cliche, but I still journal, and this is what I do every Sunday. I try to do like an I can and I will kind of statement to help me move from saying I'm capable of doing something, but I will do something. So for example, I know I can finish writing this book, but first today I will write 3 pages toward that book. So this really helps me. It's a way to help organize my day, organize my week, but it's also a way to get into the habit of writing. So this is one of the exercises I do throughout the week. Usually on my Sundays, I journal every day, but my Sundays is where I kind of reset. So finding a way to interject something like an I can or I will kind of generally prompt to help you start writing every day or every week or once a week, but it just gets you in that habit. So if you can take a screenshot of this, please do, or we can send this to you in an email. It's something that really helps me get into that habit of doing something. Also, it helps me in my mental state too. There's some days where I don't want to write. I'm not in a good mental space to write. But when I sit down a Sunday or a Monday and I just do it, I can statements and I will statements, it just kind of gets me up again to do something, to know that there's urgency and intention in my writing. And it just reminds me of my why. So I would definitely recommend all of you to do that. I did want to go through a quick rewind, but we don't have enough time. So just please read through this. Remember that your voice is a weapon. Like, you have it inside of you. You just have to start somewhere. And again, you can start local, like you all were saying with the book bans. You can start a book club where all you all read is books by authors whose books have been banned, and you can do some kind of writing exercise toward that. Anyone can be an activist. You just have to decide to start. Again, thank you all so much for being here today.